something about Final Fantasy VII doesn't add up. Before we talk about what Final Fantasy VII Re is doing, we need to discuss what we wanted it to be. When people describe a faithful remake, they're not really talking about assets, mechanics, or story beats. They're talking about reassurance. About returning to something unchanged and finding it exactly where they left it. That desire isn't shallow, it isn't nostalgic indulgence, it's human. And not everyone wanted the same thing. Some wanted preservation, some surprise, and some proof the past could still change. When something formative lives inside you long enough, it stops feeling like a game you once played, and starts feeling like a place you're allowed to go back to. Unchanged, unthreatened, safe. So when Final Fantasy VII Remake presented itself as faithful, when it looks right, sounds right, opens in the exact same place, it isn't just selling accuracy, it's offering relief. It's saying, nothing important has been lost. And that promise matters, because without it, the story the game is trying to tell later wouldn't land at all. Loss only hurts if you believe preservation was possible. That's the shape of denial. We don't deny because we're irrational, we deny because we want to keep something intact. And denial needs an object to cling to. In this case, the idea of a remake that would give us back the past without asking anything in return. Around this time, I started a painting. I knew I was doing something deliberate, just not analytical yet. It wasn't an investigation, it wasn't interpretation. It was a way of holding the feeling in place without pulling it apart. Same world, same moments, same feelings, without risk. That expectation didn't come from nowhere. The game encouraged it. It dressed itself in familiarity, it echoed scenes we remembered, it let us relax into recognition. And for a while, that worked. But denial isn't sustainable. Eventually, something slips. A detail doesn't line up. A memory fractures. A moment doesn't resolve the way it should. And when that happens, the discomfort isn't just narrative, it's personal. Because what's being threatened isn't a plot point, it's the belief that the past can be returned to unchanged. That's why the reaction was so intense. Anger, defensiveness, endless argument, not because the game did something wrong, but because it touched something we were trying hard to protect. And once that protection cracks, everything that comes after feels louder, more hostile, more deliberate. Which is exactly why the game couldn't start by telling the truth. If it had said from the beginning, this will not give you what you want, we never would have felt what it needed us to feel later. The lie wasn't cruelty, it was structure. There's a moment that follows denial, and it isn't acceptance. It's recognition. That quiet, uncomfortable realization that something has changed before you're ready to admit it. In Final Fantasy VII Re, that recognition doesn't arrive with clarity or explanation. It arrives as friction. You recognize scenes, but they don't behave. You anticipate moments, but they hesitate. You feel the outline of something familiar, and it refuses to settle. This is where a lot of players stop trusting the game, and that makes sense. Because recognition without relief feels like betrayal. You can tell something is different, but you haven't been given permission to understand why. The game doesn't resolve the discomfort, it doesn't offer you a clean break, it doesn't even fully contradict itself. It just keeps going, as if nothing is wrong. And that's what makes this stage so unsettling. You're no longer fully inside denial, but you're not ready to let go of expectation either. So the mind looks for explanations. Maybe this will make sense later. Maybe it's just setup. Maybe the payoff is coming. Hope survives longer than understanding, and the game allows that hope to persist, not to comfort you, but to stretch the space you're living in. This is not the relief of understanding, it's the tension of almost understanding. Recognition sharpens the ache instead of resolving it, because once you recognise that something is being withheld, you start feeling the absence itself. Not as loss yet, as anticipation that refuses to discharge. And that's where something subtle begins to happen. The story stops behaving like something you're receiving, and starts behaving like something you're testing. You argue with it, you replay moments, you compare memories, you begin to look for patterns. Not because the game asked you to, but because recognition without relief turns the player into an investigator.
It all makes sense when you look at it right. You gotta, stand back from it, you know?
I didn't realise this at the time, but I was already bringing something with me. My attention wasn't neutral. There was a recent absence in my life, something unresolved, and the way the game hesitated, misremembered itself, and refused to land, started to catch on it, not consciously, just enough that I stayed longer than I expected to. Once you're in that state, the question shifts. Not, what is this game trying to say? Instead, why am I still here? Around the same time, the image started to feel different. What had begun as balance began to feel charged, like something being held apart rather than resolved. I wasn't thinking in symbols yet. I just knew the stillness I'd been aiming for had started to carry tension. Denial doesn't collapse all at once, it degrades. And the thing that keeps it alive longest is hope. Hope that this is just setup, hope that the payoff is coming, hope that the story will eventually circle back to make everything feel right again. FF7 Re is careful with that hope. It never fully takes it away. Instead, it stretches it. Every time something feels off, the game offers a reason to keep going. A mystery, a future explanation, a promise deferred. This will make sense later. So the player stays, not because they're satisfied, but because they're waiting. Hope becomes suspension, a delay mechanism. You don't abandon the experience because abandoning it would mean admitting that the thing you wanted might never arrive. So you stay, watching more closely, remembering more precisely, looking for meaning in what doesn't resolve. Hope doesn't comfort here, it activates attention. So for now, this is the sum of my understanding of why these changes may have been made to Final Fantasy VII. For some people, FF7 was slain by Nomura, Najima and Katase. If that's how it felt, if it felt like something precious was taken from you, then maybe there was a motive. And maybe as a community of internet sleuths, that's where our role begins. Because if Final Fantasy VII was murdered, then maybe this isn't just criticism. Maybe it's a case. If that's true, maybe together we can solve it. But look, maybe this is as far as we go. Maybe we've mapped enough. Maybe the answers don't fully resolve. Maybe this is just what happens when art outlives its moment. At some point, continuing starts to feel indulgent, like you're forcing coherence onto something that might simply be unfinished. And there's a version of this where the honest thing to do is to stop, to let the ambiguity remain ambiguous, to accept that not every fracture hides a design.
Excuse me, sir, just one more thing.
I've found something substantial, something I'm not even sure I should talk about yet. It might be too much, too soon. Because a major part of FF7 Re isn't just about things that happened. It's about things that might have been. And the first thing that Final Fantasy VII might have been was a detective story. By trying to solve this mystery, by combing through changes, inconsistencies, misremembered events, we bring that unrealized version of the game to life, in the real world. Solving this isn't outside the game. It is the game. It's the secret meta endgame.
Our world will become a part of it. One day.
I don't think the developers want to stand on a stage and explain this. They want us to put it together, to understand it as we move through Part 3. Because when we do, something strange happens. The game reaches out to touch reality, and we touch it back. They're playing chicken with their audience. If we don't solve it, they still get their reveal. If we do, something becomes real in a way that games rarely allow. This mystery is fair, it's solvable, and they want us to try. So here's your warning. If what I'm about to say feels convincing, if it clicks a little too cleanly, you still have time to walk away. You can call it a theory, a stretch, a man who inhaled too many ground up Mako crystals.
Mako junkie, huh?
Because after this, there's no getting off this train. Some stories don't stay where they're supposed to. Aerith didn't end in 1997. She stayed. In music, in imagery, in the way people talked about loss long after the credits rolled. You can feel her echo in games that aren't even FF7 at all. Stories about cycles, rebirth, and cultures that don't know how to let go. She becomes less like a character you remember, and more like something you carry. There's a question that hangs over everything that follows. If this story was never going to give us what we wanted, if it was always going to change, distort, withhold, then why not say that from the beginning? Why not be honest? The uncomfortable answer is, honesty would have collapsed the experience before it began. A story about loss doesn't work if the audience never believes preservation was possible. If Final Fantasy VII Remake had announced itself as a radical reinterpretation, if it had signalled its intentions too clearly, we would have entered it guarded, sceptical, already braced. And braced audiences don't lose anything. They observe. So the game didn't just resemble the original, it reassured us. It opened where we remembered. It sounded the way we remembered. It let us relax into recognition. Not to trick us, but to let us believe again. Because belief is the condition that makes loss real. You can't grieve something you never trusted. You can't feel absence if you never expected presence. You can't experience denial unless you were first allowed to hope. That's why the promise mattered. That's why the faithfulness had to feel sincere. Not perfect, not exact, but close enough to lower our guard. Close enough that when things began to slip, when details misaligned, when moments didn't land, the discomfort didn't feel academic, it felt personal. The lie wasn't about hiding information, it was about establishing stakes. And once those stakes were in place, once the belief had done its work, the structure could change. Not suddenly, not loudly, just enough for us to start noticing. That's the moment where the experience pivots, not because the game tells us something is wrong, but because we feel it. And from there, the story doesn't need to convince us anymore. We're already inside it. In 1997, Final Fantasy VII entered our lives. For many of us, it didn't just entertain us, it formed us. A childhood friend. In 2015, that friend returned and made us a promise. A remake. A faithful one.
At last, the promise has been made.
In 2020, it arrived, riding back into Midgar on top of a train, looking exactly like the game it promised to be. First class, a hero. But we know our friend. and something was off. The memories weren't quite right, details were wrong, scenes misremembered. Some people called it a bait and switch. But then, as we leave Midgar, at almost the exact moment Tifa questions Cloud's account of Nibelheim, the game shows us something we know is false. Zack survives. And in that instant, we understand. The game is lying to us. Not metaphorically, literally. This isn't the faithful remake we were promised. Final Fantasy VII Remake personifies Cloud in our world. It even has a new theme tune that tells us so. It contains two competing storylines, conflicting memories, a fractured identity. Remake is the perfect title, because it is a lie. And that lie makes the game an unreliable narrator, just like Cloud. Once you notice the game is lying, your memories don't stay outside it, they come with you. Rebirth then represents Aerith. It has her theme. It's brighter than it should be, restless, always pulling you sideways, off the path. It peers under the surface trying to understand what this remake really is. And then, at the moment we expect catharsis, it robs us of it. For anyone hoping for a faithful remake of FF7, it dies right here in front of them.
The worst butchery of a classic story
As if
in the
searching for
history of
something no
Warware's
storyteller
legendary
can
reputation
never be
began with Final Fantasy VII, and it died
Could
with
have
Final
been
Fantasy
good,
VII Remake.
if only
My
it's
favorite
time for
childhood
us.
game.
Not like this. Not like this.
But this isn't where the story ends. Last chance to step away. Part 3 will likely represent Sephiroth. When we reach the northern crater, the veil will be pulled back completely. There will be no faithful remake left to cling to, no ambiguity, no denial. The game will run off the rails. And the re-trilogy reveals itself as what it truly is. A failed clone. But wait, does classic FF7 end with Cloud being an imposter, a fraud, a man who never lived up to his promise? No, that reveal was the greatest sleight of hand in the original game. This time, the entire trilogy is the sleight of hand. Acceptance begins in the livestream, inside the memory of the Nibelheim reactor. We realise this is a new story, but hidden beneath it is the game we knew all along. No subtitle, no prefix, just Final Fantasy VII. The world, the systems, the music, the mechanics, all of it built quietly, right under our noses. The Re-project wasn't replacing FF7. It was rebuilding our way back to it, just like the real Cloud beneath the false one. The Re-trilogy will live, then it will die, and from that death, its pieces will be pulled apart and reborn as the faithful remake we thought we were playing all along. Because this story isn't about changing fate, it's about learning why it can't be. It's about impermanence, about loss, about how things become other things, and about how, sometimes, the greatest trick of all is convincing us that something is permanent. By this point, the pattern is unmistakable. Final Fantasy VII Re repeatedly builds towards moments you recognise. It frames them carefully, cues the music, positions the camera exactly where memory expects it to be. Then, it hesitates. The release doesn't come, or it comes sideways, or it arrives fragmented, diluted, unfinished. This isn't denial anymore, and it isn't confusion. It's suspension. You're not blocked from progression, you're denied resolution. And that distinction matters, because this isn't the absence of content, it's the presence of delay. Expectation is raised, and then held there, again and again. The game stretches the space between anticipation and payoff, between recognition and understanding, between memory and outcome. At first, that feels like a pacing problem, like bloat, like the game doesn't know when to land, but the repetition changes the meaning. When pressure doesn't discharge, it doesn't disappear, it accumulates. Frustration creeps in, not because nothing is happening, but because too much is happening without release. The story keeps moving forward, but the tension you were meant to resolve has nowhere to go, so it moves out of the narrative and into the player. Into impatience, into fatigue, into arguments about intent, respect, and betrayal. And this is the crucial shift. At a certain point, this stops feeling like a story struggling to land, and starts feeling like a relationship under strain between you and the thing you're engaging with. The game keeps asking you to stay with it, to keep playing, to keep hoping, but it refuses to give you the one thing stories are usually built to provide: the sense that this moment is finished. Once you realize that, once you accept that the release isn't coming when you expect it, the experience changes shape. You're no longer just waiting for answers, you're carrying pressure forward with you. There's another way to read what's happening here, and I want to be clear up front that this is a reading, not an answer. It begins with resistance. Because once you step back, it becomes hard to ignore how consistently FF7 Re introduces it, not just between characters, but between expectation and outcome. Moments are set up, then delayed, or denied, or reframed just enough to keep them from landing cleanly. The game moves forward, but it keeps dragging something behind it. The resistance doesn't stop the movement, it turns attachment into feeling. Anger, disappointment, defensiveness, hope. And what's strange is where that pressure lives. It doesn't sit neatly inside the story. It forms in the space between the story and the player, between what we remember, what we were promised, and what we're actually given. Once you notice the pattern, the resistance starts to feel intentional. Not cruel, not careless, designed. And that's where the reading shifts. At a certain point, the project stops behaving like a story that's gone wrong, and starts behaving like something closer to a performance. The developers don't stay invisible. They don't rush to reassure. They don't smooth things over. Instead, they hold the tension. They allow misunderstanding. They allow anger. They allow the audience to argue, project, speculate. In that sense, they almost take on the role of antagonists. Not to defeat the player, but to give the experience resistance. The player isn't just consuming the story anymore. They're reacting to it, carrying it, completing it in real time, not as a character, but as a participant. If that reading holds, even partially, then the project isn't just telling a story about loss, impermanence, and memory. It's staging those ideas, letting them play out, not on screen alone, but inside the people who are still here, still arguing, still waiting. This doesn't require intent to be proven. It doesn't need a manifesto or confirmation. It only requires noticing the effect. The pressure, the weight, the way the story refuses to resolve and leaves something unfinished in you instead. And if that's what's happening, then the question stops being what the story is doing and becomes, what is it asking us to carry? This pressure doesn't stay inside the game. You find yourself thinking about it after you stop playing, revisiting scenes, replaying arguments, watching analyses you don't agree with, and still watching them all the way through. Not to be convinced, just to remain in contact. Once something is being carried like that, the question stops being, what is it doing? And becomes, what you're bringing with you. That's where I need to slow down, because this isn't abstract for me. I kept thinking about Cora. I don't think that's accidental, because if this project is really about what happens when something formative refuses to resolve, when memory, attachment and loss stay active instead of settling, then the most important material it works with isn't on screen at all. It's what we bring. For me, the timing mattered. My sense of loss was recent, unsettled, still unintegrated. And the way Final Fantasy VII misremembered itself, the way it keeps showing you almost the moment you expect, then swerving, started to feel less ensuring and more like remembrance. Not the clean kind, the real kind. For me, the connection between Cora and Ree doesn't stop at interpretation. So many of its scenes, its music, its things that might have been. I can't help but feel her there while I'm playing. Not like a ghost, more like a presence. Like when you carry someone for so long, you start noticing them in the corners of your life. Now that's not unique to me. This is a normal human thing. I've worked in animation for years, and every now and then you see someone comment that a piece of media mattered to them. And the strongest ones, the ones that stop you in your tracks, are almost always about someone they've lost. Because stories don't just entertain us, they become a place where we store people. I didn't just feel this during Rebirth. After finishing it, I went back and played the original again, and I realised something strange. The attachments I'd made, the new meaning I was seeing, all of it came with me, and so did my loved ones. They were there in the background of my thoughts, like passengers. With Final Fantasy VII specifically, the developers know this. They know what this game is to a certain generation. They know how likely its themes are to hit those old pressure points. Memory, grief, inheritance, letting go. I think that brings us to what might be Ree's most powerful offering to the player. Because while I was playing, I kept thinking about the people I've lost. Not because the game told me to, but because it kept making room for it. In the moments where we explore what might have been, in the ways its music keeps circling memory, in the way it refuses to let the story land cleanly, that's where I think the game's real convergence point is headed. In its story, I predicted that dream worlds are offered up as weight on the scale of judgment. But outside the story, the player is doing something parallel. Whether we mean to or not, we offer up our own alternate endings, our own hopes, our own fan fictions, and along with them, pieces of ourselves. And if a part of you is being offered into the story, then small parts of everyone who shaped you come with it too, including the ones you miss. There's even a quiet ritual language around this at the ends of Remake and Rebirth. Aerith's water purification, twice at thresholds, right when the game tempts you with new possibilities. Like it's saying, if you're going to bring something into this, purify it. Don't let it rot into attachment. Let it become something else. To me, it feels numinous, like something that isn't just symbolic, something that is real, even if it's only real inside us. And then, when I played the classic again, something else happened. When I reached its final moments, staring into the unknowable result of Aerith's sacrifice, I saw more than I used to see. I realised they'd come with me. I wonder what you'll see.